We're here live from Antwerp, Belgium to talk about all of the things that happened in the men's team final. Japan won gold for the first time since 2015, the US was on the medal stand for the first time since 2014, and China took home the silver medal. And all this happened despite every single team counting a fall and inquiries being put in right and left. I'm Kensley and I'm the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. So let's set the stage for the competition. So Japan was in first place, the US was in second, Great Britain was in third, but they had had a pretty bad showing on vault until we knew that they could improve there. And China, who was another favorite, had completely bombed. They had found their way down in 8th place. They had to end up flying in an athlete from China to be their new replacement athlete, who did end up having to compete in team finals, and no one knew how he was going to do, what he was going to be competing on, and what his start values were. So it was a little bit of a question mark. Okay, could China actually come back? Getting started in rotation 1, it didn't start great, to be honest. So Chiba Kenta opened for Japan, and in floor he had a bunch of deep landings. He had some weird passes. I don't think he actually completed one of the passes that he was wanting to compete, and he ended up getting a 12.933. So it was not great for Japan, to say the least. So then we go over to pommel horse. James Hall of Great Britain starts off there, and he is clearly one of their most consistent, if not the most consistent gymnast on the team. And all of a sudden he falls, and we're like, oh no, this is about to be a straight 2.5 hours of pure chaos. But all the athletes were actually able to come back. So Jake Jarman for Great Britain came back with a decent routine on pommel horse. And then, of course, they have the double back-to-back reigning Olympic champion Max Whitlock, who came in with a 15.266. And it was like, okay, Great Britain is going to be back in this. They just sort of had, a rough start to their rotation. So in the same rotation, Canada is rotating with them. Zachary Clay of Canada opens the team, and it was exceptional. The next guy comes up and I'm like, wow, they hit 2 for 3. So Canada in the qualification round, they just nailed their qualification. It was the best I have ever seen them perform as a team. And people were like, do you think they can do it in team final? And I was like, I don't know. I think they kind of used up all of their energy for qualifications and getting that spot to the Paris Olympics. But they came up, they hit 2 pommel horse routines, and then all of a sudden they got to the third guy and he fell. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is not going to be quite as steady as I had thought it could be. Let's hop back over to floor. So Joel Moldauer is going up, 2017 world bronze medalist on floor. He sticks 4 out of 6 passes. It was incredible. And I was able to talk to him afterwards in the mix zone, and he said, you know what? I wanted to prove that I was the floor worker that I know I am, and that I wasn't going to choke like I did at the national championships. So he puts up an incredible rotation. Fred does really well. Asher does okay. We go over to vault. China is using downgraded vaults because, as I mentioned, Lin Xiaopan had a fly-in from China. He had a 4.8 difficulty on vault, which is so much lower than the rest of the team, who typically put up 5-6 vaults. But even still, even after all of this, China was still leading the scores. Funnily enough, at the end of the rotation, we didn't actually know where the US was because one of the Japanese floor workers, Minami Kozuki, had put in an inquiry for his score, and that took a while for that to come in. And so the announcer told the athletes, okay, go ahead and move on to your second rotation. And Asher Hong's score was not in. So the US was sitting down at the very bottom, even though we knew that they weren't going to be there. It's just that one of their scores hadn't come in. It was really outrageous how long it took for the score to come in, but eventually Asher's score comes in. China's in first with a 1.333 lead over the USA in second. Then we had Switzerland in third, Japan in fourth, Great Britain in fifth, Germany in sixth, Italy in seventh, and Canada at the bottom in 8th. If you thought rotation 1 had problems, rotation 2 had even more. So the US had crazy pommel horse problems, and they aren't necessarily problems that people who aren't really familiar with MAG would know about, right? Because Koi fell, so obviously people know that a fall is bad, but they wouldn't necessarily know some of the other problems that were happening. So if you remember in qualifications, Joel Moldauer, he didn't get credit for his dismount, and he was down in difficulty by 0.9 of a point. So Yule again sort of had problems with his dismount. He was off balance when he went up into the handstand, and to do the pirouette, he had to pirouette very quickly and then ended up adding another additional part of a pirouette, which actually upgraded his dismount from a D to an E. So that was something that was a little bit different. So then we get to Fred, and Fred's routine looks great. And then all of a sudden his score pops up and it's in like the 12s. And so I was texting one of my friends who's a brevet judge, which is the highest rating judge that you can be in the world. And I was asking them, like, hey, can you give me some insights on why you think that the score is so low? And they said, well, on the scissor to handstand, Fred had to use too much strength and his legs reversed direction, meaning that he not only lost the value for the scissor element, but he also lost the element group because you have to have scissors in your routine, which is another half of a point. And the American delegation put in an inquiry for his pommel horse score, but it was rejected. And then Coy went up and then Coy fell off pommel horse. So like the US was in a big hole and a big problem after pommel horse. So Japan, who is rotating with the US, they go up and they have 2 hit routines between Hashimoto Daiki and Kaya Kazuma, but then Chiba Kenta comes up and he falls on pommel horse and we're like, oh my gosh, why is this such a mess? So Nick Klessing of Germany, he's going on vault. He goes to do a handspring double front. He sits it. Taha Serhani of Switzerland is over on parallel bars and he sits his dismount. And honestly, there were probably more falls, but I can only watch so many routines at one time. But this second rotation was truly magical in how bad it was in terms of falls and missed opportunities. But of course there were some highlights that I do want to share with you. So Niccolo Bartolini of Italy, I thought his vault was lovely. His cause 1.5. His form is just so nice in the air. He did have to take a little bit of a hop, but it's just artistic. And the way he salutes, he's just wonderful to watch. And then we have Christian Baumann over on parallel bars for Switzerland. And he, of course, is a world-class parallel bar worker. He's made many finals before. And he officially, as of tonight, has joined my list of athletes who is allowed to do Makuts. And it's currently a very short list. It's only Lucas Dowser and Christian Baumann. So hopefully more people will be added because I would like to see the skill performed a little bit more fluidly across the board for men's gymnastics. Following the second rotation, China is still in the lead. Switzerland has bumped up into second. Italy's in third. Japan's in fourth. USA's in fifth. Great Britain is in sixth. Germany's in seventh and Canada is in eighth. Hey everyone, if you love men's gymnastics, I would really appreciate if you would take a moment and like this video, and also if you would subscribe to our channel. I have a goal of making it to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the World Championships, and it would mean so much if you would just take a little bit of time and make that happen. Once we reach 1,000 subscribers, we can actually start to monetize our YouTube channel, and then we can travel to more competitions and bring you even more men's gymnastics coverage. So thank you so much for supporting me, supporting this channel, and supporting men's gymnastics. Remember, after rotation 2, Great Britain is really far down the rankings, but they come out of the woodwork for vault. Jake Jarman opens up Yannick Hura, round off entry on 3.5 twist off, and he lands it. Oh my gosh, the vault is near perfect. It is so beautifully executed. He got a 15.4. It's the highest score of the day, and it really is such a redemption for him because in the qualification round, he ended up sitting that vault, and today he nailed it for his team and certainly helped them jump up the rankings. But it wasn't just him. The entire vault team for Great Britain did their job. So Harry Hepworth did a handspring Randy, also 5.6 vault, although Jake Jarman's was a 6.0, and then Courtney Tulloch did a Dragulescu, which is another 5.6 vault, and he performed very well. And I was a little bit worried about Courtney's vault because in the warm-up, he had actually sat just doing a handspring double front, which is an easier vault than the handspring double front half out. But competition, I don't know if it was the adrenaline, I don't know if he just got himself in a better mind frame, but it was excellent. So the US are over on still rings, and they're fine on still rings. Their still rings are not like world class at this point. It's just another event that they kind of have to get through and not fall and just put up decent scores. It was fine. Over on high bar, we had Switzerland and China. So Taha Serhani of Switzerland, who I just talked about, fell on his parallel bar dismount. He definitely redeemed that, and he had an excellent routine on high bar. Truly, he has some of the highest releases in the competition. It is absolutely gorgeous to watch. So if you haven't ever seen his high bar routines, I encourage you to go to YouTube, find more of his videos. He is superb there. Right after this really excellent routine from Taha Serhani, we have one of the Chinese athletes go Sueda, and he has a very difficult routine. He goes for the skill that's called a Lukin. It's a Tkachev skill, which is a release up and over the bar, and he adds a full twist to it. It's super, super difficult. So he nails this, and then he just goes for a regular Tkachev, which is much easier, and he falls. And this, this happens a lot of times to athletes where they do this really difficult skill, and it's like they get in this mindset where they think, okay, the hardest part is over and they don't have to concentrate as much, and they end up falling on the easier skills. And that's exactly what happened to Sueda. So he gets back up and he ends up falling on another Tkachev, which is like, okay, what happened? And then he had a massive arm bend on one of his final skills, and China ended up having to count an 11.166 on high bar, which was not great. So at this point, I'm like going through my mind about all the teams and all the people who have had falls, and I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone has had a fall except for Italy. I wonder if Italy can, pull something magical out, because Italy had not medaled since 1913, and they had not won any other color medal except for bronze. So I was like, wow, they could, in this over 100-year drought, they could do it. And then of course the next person up on parallel bars, Matteo Leventesi, fell. And I was like, okay, I'm never allowed to say that again. Okay, so after Leventesi's routine, then we have two more inquiries come in, one from the Japanese and one from the Italians. The Japanese inquiry was accepted. So following this third rotation, China is still in the lead, followed by Great Britain and their incredible vault rotation. Then we have Switzerland, then Japan, then USA in fifth, then Germany, Canada, and Italy. And at this point, people on Twitter were like, oh my gosh, do you think Switzerland, can they stay in a bronze medal position? I was like, well, they're a really great team, but they really have gone through their three strongest events, and they have their next three events, which are going to be weaker, and it's going to be really hard to keep them in medal potential, especially considering that, there are other teams going to stronger events for them. So while this conversation is happening over on Twitter, there were people on press row who were grumbling about the US being in fifth again. And for those of you who are new to men's gymnastics or don't know, the US has placed fifth so many times. It's like fifth place has their number, and it's been really irritating to the athletes to consistently end up fifth. And I kept trying to remind people, you never know what the standings are really going to be like until all of the teams go through vault, because vault is the event that has the highest execution score, and it really helps typically, unless there's a lot of falls, but typically it helps bump people up the ranking. So heading into the fourth rotation, knowing that Switzerland had already gone through their strongest events, I was pretty sure that the medals were just going to end up coming into China, Great Britain, Japan, and the USA. And so this is where I really started to focus for the rest of the event. As the US was going to vault, they were fine on vault. They luckily did increase their difficulty from last year, but their vaults were not executed as well as they were in the qualification round. So it was fine. Although I will say that Asher's Guang was excellent, like superb, wonderful, high, floaty, powerful, all of the wonderful adjectives, and he ended up scoring a 15 for his vault there. But they were rotating with Japan, and this is just where Japan started to pull away. So Kaya Kazuma vaulted a cause double, which I think most of us were the most nervous about with the Japan vault lineup, because Kaya is not the most consistent vaulter, and so it was really great for him to hit that vault. And then Hashimoto Daiki got a 14.9 and Minami Kazuki got a 15. It was just like one major score after the other, and then they really started to jump up the standings. So China at this point is over on floor, and they were just having a hoppity top time, and they were giving away tents like it was absolute candy. Sueda just kept us on our toes after high bar and was doing his best to save several of his passes. And so they ended up dropping down the rankings after floor. So at this point, Great Britain is over on parallel bars, and they did fine routines, serviceable routines, kind of like the US on still rings, like no strong workers particularly in this group, but they were fine routines and they just kept them in the running. So following 4 rotations, Japan was in first, but just barely over Great Britain. China was in third, followed by the USA in fourth, then Canada in fifth, Switzerland in sixth, Italy in seventh, and Germany was down in eighth. Okay, in the 5th rotation, Max Whitlock of Great Britain got us started on high bar, and his routine was clean. He stuck the dismount, and his day at that point was done because he had already completed all of the events that he was going to be performing on. So Jake Jarman, his teammate, comes up next, and at this point the British were about half a point down on qualifying, and Jake does a pretty good job. And then James Hall comes out to wrap up the competition on high bar for them, and he falls. And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, if the US goes clean, the bronze medal or higher is theirs, because Great Britain has really just taken themselves out of the running with these couple of mistakes. So over on pommel horse, China's there. They ended up having to change a lot of their rotation from qualifying. So Yo Hao was brought in and he got a 13.4, which is not like that high of a score, but it was much better than the 10.9 that they did end up having to count in qualifying. Sun Wei did the best performance of the Chinese with a 14.266, and then Lin Xiaopan, who's the athlete they had to fly in from China, he actually brought quite a bit of lower difficulty, but he is more consistent there, and so they were able to have, an okay routine to add to their total. I do just want to add in this point that several people have asked, okay, well, if Lin Xiaopan didn't have the highest difficulty that matches with this team lineup, why was he selected? And what we have been told is that he was the only athlete who had a visa that was available to be and compete in Europe and in Belgium. And so that's part of the reason why he was selected. The US and Japan are on parallel bars, and the US, for the most part, did what they needed to do, but Yul Moldauer specifically demonstrated why he is the veteran here. He stuck the dismount. He went 14.933. It was one of the highest valued routines of the entire competition, and he helped move the US into second. Moldauer's score of 14.933 actually edged out all of the Japanese gymnasts, but the Japanese gymnast total score was by far higher, with Kaya putting up a 14.733 and Hashimoto putting up a 14.866 and Sugimoto putting up a 14.833. So heading into the last rotation, Japan was in the lead over USA by a little bit over 1.5 points. China was in third by a little over a point, and Great Britain was 1.8 behind China. At this point, thanks to Spencer Barnes' data over at the balance beam situation, we know that all 8 teams were well below their qualifying scores, with the exception of China, because China imploded in qualifying, and so they did what they do best, which is come back in team finals. The final rotation, China was headed to their final and strongest event, still rings, plus it's an event that for them honestly has pretty low risk compared to where the US and Japan and Great Britain were. So the US and Japan were going to high bar, Great Britain was going to floor, and those are typically events where people fall a bit more and can incur more deductions. So just for example, Olympic champion Liu Yang of China, he got a 15 on still rings compared to the very first routine that was put up on high bar for the Americans, which was Kuai Yang, who got a 12.833. So you can very quickly see the balance start to shift, and that's just exactly what happened over the different routines. Is so the Chinese would put up a huge score, and like the Americans would put up like a fine score on high bar. And as the final scores came in, and as Fred was doing his final high bar routine, which by the way was a little bit terrifying because he nearly came off the bar at one point. He went the wrong direction on a skill, and we were like, oh my gosh, is he going to be able to stay on? But he managed it. He landed, he stuck his dismount, and as the final scores came in, you could just see the emotion on the American team's face, because they had honestly been in a drought for what's it been 9 years now, and watching them experience that moment, being able to be on the medal stand. And of course, for Japan too, they had not won gold as a team since 2015. So just really, really special moments overall. The final scores were Japan in first with a 255.594, China in second with a 253.794, USA in third with a 252.428, Great Britain in fourth with a 249.461, Switzerland in fifth with a 244.426, Germany in sixth with a 244.026, Canada in seventh with a 243.028, and Italy rounding out the top 8 with a 241.160. After the competition and the medal ceremony was done, I had the opportunity to go into the mix zone, and I spoke with Brett McClure, who is the head coach of the American team. And I asked him specifically about the team winning this medal, because the last time he was with a team that won a medal, he was actually competing on the team in 2003 in Anaheim. And he said, you know, it's really exciting. And he remembers his first time ever winning a medal with a team in Ghent. And he said that he was really happy for the team, but honestly, he preferred to not be on the podium. He likes it when it's just the athletes there. And I also spent some time and asked him about the upcoming Paris Olympic Games and the qualification procedures that they will use, because this is the first team in a long time that they've used all-arounders for the team, and it's the team that got the medal. And I said, you know, is this something that you're going to focus on and just really say, okay, we're going to look at all-arounders? And he said, no, absolutely not. We're going to look at one-eventers. We're going to look at people who do 3 or 4 events. We're going to look at all-arounders. We really want to put together the strongest team that we can. So I thought that that was pretty interesting, because I thought that maybe after the success that they would go only in a direction of looking at all-arounders. After my interview with Brett, I had the opportunity to speak with Yul Moldauer, who is the absolute veteran of this team. And before coming to these World Championships, I spoke with Yul in his home gym, and I said, you know, at the end of the championships, what is your dream for all of this? And he said at the end of it, my dream is to be standing on the podium next to Fred Richard, Koi Young, Paul Judah, Asher Hong, and Colt Walker. And that's exactly what he got to do. And he talked about being a quiet leader, and he felt like that was more or less his role on this team. And he kept using the phrase quiet leader over and over again. And I, you know, at one point was sort of joking with him, and I was like, you know, I think if you asked anyone in this arena, they probably wouldn't call you a quiet leader. And he, you know, like chuckled and said, yeah, well, competition is obviously different, but just a really, really special moment for this American team. I certainly wish I would have had the opportunity to speak to some of the other athletes, but the Chinese athletes walked through the media zone, and most of them weren't willing to do interviews. And then the Japanese athletes, understandably, were being very heavily requested, and it was almost impossible to get an interview with them. So maybe in the coming days, I'll be able to speak to some of the athletes from other countries. I did just want to highlight one final thing, which is that Kohei Uchimura, who is the greatest male gymnast of all time, he is here with the Japanese team coaching. So after all of the events and everything was done and the arena was completely quiet, I come back into the media area, and there you see him. Kohei Uchimura is doing pommel horse on the world stage again. And just everyone's watching him. There are major cameras all around him, and everyone's taking video. And it's just such a special moment, because the last time that the Japanese won the gold medal at the World Championships, Kohei Uchimura was on that team. And I just think that that's a really special moment to have him be there for both championships. So you can find footage of that on my Twitter or on Scott Bregman's Twitter. If you're interested in following us on different platforms, you can find us on Instagram at Neutral Deductions, and on Twitter, it's Kensley Ann, and Ann with an E. If you desire to help support us financially, because it does take a lot of money to get to these World Championships, we're looking for about $950 more from some listeners to help us break even for getting to this World Championships. So if you have the financial means to do so, I'm going to link our PayPal down below, and truly even like $10 helps us get a meal. $50 is great. $100 is wonderful. Anything that you can do to help so that we can break even and just feel more comfortable coming to these championships and covering men's gymnastics for you. That's all for today. We'll be back for men's all-around final in a couple of days. I'll see you next time.